Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your Flip Classroom and our continuing discussion of labor movements during the Industrial Revolution, right? So, the big thing about it is, though, is this is right where we left off in class, right? We are going to now pick back up right where we left off in class after, honestly, quite frankly, an absolute hilarious day in class, right? An absolutely wildly hilarious day. I don't think I've laughed that hard in a really, really long time. We were talking about Napoleon and talking about some facts about him and stuff like that. We were talking about some other different items, talking about going forward for the rest of the next couple weeks, what's going to be going on, going into rally and stuff like that. Now, by the way, I do have your next test date planned. Ask me the next time we see each other in class. It'll be very, very important. Now, going into it, though, we talked a lot today in class about the ever-growing Industrial Revolution, right? We discussed how this is going to affect this thing known as the gender division of labor. We discussed that quite a bit, how this is going to actually affect lower-class women very, very differently from upper-class women. We talked about growing liberal reform movements, like the Mines Act of 1844 or 1842, and we're going to bring those two things back up again later as well when we get into more liberal reform that's going to occur in Great Britain during the 1800s, right? And that'll actually be in the back part of this unit. So it'll be very important that we remember those laws passed because we'll need to shift them back forward a little bit later, and we'll kind of line everything up, make sure it's all nice and pretty in your brains going into this next test, right? So the big thing about it, though, is we left off talking about labor organization and unions. We were having a conversation in class yesterday about the abilities that workers have over their employers, right? We were talking about striking, boycotting, things like that as well. Well, unions, ironically enough, early on in Great Britain were actually outlawed, right? So there was these things known as the Combination Acts of 1799. Because early on, before unions were called unions, before they were even called these things known as amalgamated societies, they were called combinations, right? Combinations was just another fancy word for a labor union in and of itself. Well, the Combination Acts of 1799 actually outlawed labor unions and labor organizations in Great Britain to try and not prevent any kind of efficiency or not prevent, or excuse me, what is the word I'm looking for here? The Combination Acts outlawed labor unions because they believed labor unions would be inefficient to actual growing factory models in Great Britain. Right there we go. That's exactly what I was trying to say. So the thing about it, though, is less than 30 years later in 1824, the Combination Acts are going to be repealed. Why is this? A lot of it has to do with the fact that the earliest unions were organized regardless of these acts, right? Early unions and early labor movements are going to be organized in factories by iron workers, paper workers, wood workers, all these different people that are involved with the growing labor and growing industry, mostly lower middle class workers, though, in general, are going to actually help organize these earliest unions. And they're going to get organized regardless of these laws. They perform strikes, they limited the use of apprentices in other areas. So the Combination Acts would be repealed in 1824, mostly due to the fact that literally you just couldn't stop the growing expanse of these actual labor organizations. Now, interestingly enough, though, big thing to kind of bring up in the back of your mind, lower class workers like miners and cotton mill workers and people like that didn't really gravitate towards labor union work movements and actual striking and movements against the employer for quite some time, due to mostly to fear of consistency of employment and consistency of pay, right? But this eventually, though, these combination groups and these amalgamated societies are going to grow into legitimate unions that are going to be very, very politically active, right? And as you can see right here, this right here is an actual poster from the entire Industrial Revolution. This is one of the amalgamated. Oh wow, geez, this is one of the amalgamated societies and crests of one of those unions, right? This one right here is the Amalgamated Society of Woodworkers. So if you ever see anything in an excerpt or something like that that says Amalgamated Society, it's basically just referring to a labor union, right? This right here is the Amalgamated Society of Paper Workers, right? These people banding together to get their demands met, to make sure that they're being paid enough money, that they're being paid a living wage, and that they're being paid a competitive amount in the market, right? Now that we have actually gotten to basically the end of the first Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, we got to talk a little bit about, though, is it going to stay in Great Britain, right? The entire time that we've been actually talking about the Industrial Revolution, we've been discussing what's going on in Great Britain. Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain, Great Britain. What about the continent, though? A lot of people ask, and I'll tell you what, that's a great question, Addie Stein. What about the continent? When is the rest of the continent going to industrialize quite like the British did and stuff like that? When are they going to get to join in on all this pollution and fun stuff like that? Don't forget the pepper moths. The pepper moths are very important. So So going into it, though, in general, industrialization of the continent is going to occur, but it's actually going to be slow, and it's going to take a very, very different route in many different countries, right? And also, it never really got jumped off in the continent until the 1800s, right? Now, there's a lot of reasons why, okay? Why did Great Britain industrialize first, and then the rest of the continent not industrialized until much later, until like basically 1850 when the Industrial Revolution really kicked off in those places in a big way. In a little while, you're going to see like, oh, 1850. Well, calm down, okay? The idea, though, is mostly the fact that, one, inflation is a huge issue that's going on in the continent. The constant fluctuating prices of market goods are going to prevent industrialization in those areas because industrial goods are going to cost something one day and may cost something completely different the next, right? Destruction as well. And what I mean by destruction is the Napoleonic Wars, okay? Destruction, destroyed cities, massive wars and battles that have gone on there for as long, and for during the coalition wars has left large chunks of the continent very depleted of resources, right? Now also, money for investment is going to be a really big thing, okay? So money for investment is going to really take, be a problem in the continent because post steam power, after the steam engine comes out and stuff like that, and many of these like new machines are ran off steam power, it's going to be a massive upfront investment to actually get factories and things like that started by outlawing guilds permanently and then starting an industrial process on the continent. Also, revolution. The French Revolution is going to slow down the process of industrialization in the continent dramatically. Another big thing is secrets don't make friends, because literally the British actually kept the Industrial Revolution a secret. And we'll talk about that here in about like 2 seconds. But they prevented the secrets from ever leaving the aisle, right? You could be arrested if you sold industrial secrets to the French or to the Holy Roman Empire or to the Dutch or to anybody else, right? Now, the Dutch do what they want. They were probably going to figure it out eventually no matter what. So the big thing about it, though, is like, you gotta love those tulips, those windmills, and also, you know, like dams and sticking your finger in there. So the big thing about it, though, in general, is you also have war, and Napoleon is going to really drastically slow down the process or kind of just like bring the continent backwards when it comes to starting the Industrial Revolution. I know we have several people that like run track and stuff like that. I know Inyasha and Erla, I know y'all do track. I don't know anybody else that does track in the actual, in class. But I know that y'all do. I want you to imagine that Inyasha and Erla are about to run a race against each other. And Inyasha is Great Britain, and she's 40 feet ahead of Erla when the starting pistol gets fired, right? That's a lot like the Industrial Revolution. Great Britain just had a massive leap forward on everyone. And then the continent is going to be coming up, trying to regain that ground, trying to get after it. Now, interestingly enough, as you can see, some of the continent does begin to catch up, right? So what this graph is right here is actually a very interesting little thing about the ideas of industrialization and mass industrialization in continental areas, right? So as you can see with this green line right here, the UK skyrocketed forward in industrialization. But wait a minute, is there somebody there that's shot past them all of a sudden? Yes, that's going to be Germany. And notice the all-important years that they begin to shoot past them. Right around the early 1900s, suspiciously right around when World War I begins, okay? Now, the big thing about it, though, just in general, is that you do need to know that it's going to take, a very different process in many different countries, okay? Germany's going to industrialize quickly, whereas many Eastern European countries are not, okay? Now, 1815 could be considered the starting line, okay? You could say, oh, we're going to begin the industrial process in these countries in 1815. Why? Mainly due to the fact that Napoleon has been exiled for the second time, Waterloo is over, and now the continent can actually begin to rebuild, right? Fix some of that destruction. Find a way to stabilize their inflation. Find money for investment in post-steam power machinery and things like that. Now, honestly, though, thank God for the putting out system and the leftover guilds, because the continent would have been left destitute, right? So because there's so many new cheap British goods flooding into the market and coming into the continent that are actually undercutting so many different price points throughout the rest of Europe. So luckily enough, the remnants of the putting out system and leftover guilds kept the continent stable enough while they were beginning to industrialize, right? And also in the long run is that they're going to need to borrow a lot of stuff from Great Britain, and we'll get into that right now because we got to talk about the agents of industrialization. How is the continent actually going to pull this off and begin their own industrialization process as well? Well, the first things foremost is that British technology and workers are actually going to start selling secrets to European countries, right? A good example is these people known as the cockerels, right? The cockerels are these people from Great Britain who actually sold different parts and pieces and different secrets to using spinning jennies, automated actual textile production, and early versions of the steam engine, right? And so they actually went to what is now Germany and actually sold a lot of their different ideas and goods in this city called Leipzig, right? And actually began to push new industrial goods and products out there to other areas in the continent, because the continent had people that were willing to pay a lot of money for it, right? So the British are going to eventually realize that there was no way to keep this secret for very, very long. And after, like, Napoleon was exiled the second time, they kind of began to loosen the ideas on selling of these different ideas and moving these different products into the continent, because they were like, you know what? We have so many other options. We've got a head start on them. We've got this 40-yard dash. We got plenty of time, right? Now, going into it as well, you have to understand a big thing, though, a big difference between the industrialization in Britain, which actually was much more like a direct influence of middle-class families and different family workers and different family groups that are going to start factories, build up things very, very quickly, and really, really get after it. What's going to happen, though, in the continent is that the governments of continental countries, the government of France, or the new government of France, under the new king that we'll get to here in about like 2 seconds. Under like the new government of France, under the new government of the the German Confederation, as it was so called by this point, under the new government of Spain, well, not so much, under the new government of Northern Italy, Austria, places like that, the governments are going to begin to directly support the growth of industrial, like, revolutionary ideas in the continent. Whereas in Great Britain, families opened factories on their own, and they went after, and they literally created it almost independently of the government, and the government just reaped the free market rewards and taxed those families, right? Now, how are they going to pull this off, though? Well, one big thing is tariff protection, right? The government is going to get involved and begin to, like, tax foreign imports and foreign goods, just like they did during mercantilism, to try and make the goods built or made in their country a little bit more appealing. The other big thing about it as well is that the government is going to get directly involved in railroad subsidies, right? So the governments of the continental countries are going to begin to lay railroads, and not by private companies, but instead they will lay the rails and then charge you to use them, right? So this is going to make the governments a lot of money, secure their initial investment, and then also it's going to help them build railroads all over the continent as fast as possible, right? Now, another really intense thing, too, as well, is that industry is going to start becoming a sense of national pride, right? And this is known as economic nationalism, the idea that we are producing X good. For example, in Germany, when I showed you that graph a little bit earlier, where Germany is going to kind of like pass by United Kingdom in the like growth of industrialization, a lot of that had to do with the invention of this thing known as the Bessemer process. And the Bessemer process was created in the late 1800s. It's how you create steel, right? And so steel has more tensile strength and is more like actually durable than iron is, all right? And will actually not corrode as fast, and it actually is much more easier to use, and it's also easier to build with. And so the like Germans become like literally use that as a part of their economic nationalism. They're like, we, the German Empire, created steel, all right? So like same kind of thing as well in other countries when you're looking at ones like the British, right? This right here is a very, very good example of like the economic nationalism, economic pride, and industrialism. This right here is a very famous building that existed in Great Britain known as the Crystal Palace, okay? Jot that down with economic nationalism. The Crystal Palace. It is a giant building that is made out of glass and iron that served as an expo center for industrial goods. And they would hold a massive industrial fair there every single year, inviting people from all over the continent to come and see the things that Britain had produced, right? Cheap textiles, new products. One of the very first automobiles was actually debuted at the Crystal Palace during this entire like era of the Industrial Revolution. And as you can see right here, here's an even better view of it. This giant glass kingdom that was built to show off British pride in their different ideas and goods. Ironically enough, there's a soccer team now today, like actually named after it, Crystal Palace FC, which is actually named after this original structure. Now, fun fact, it's not there anymore. It actually burned down. One of the offices actually caught fire, and then the entire place caught fire. Somebody literally right now is going to try and prove Mr. Terry wrong and be like, oh my God, how did it catch fire if it's made out of glass and iron? Well, calm down over there. First of all, the floors were made out of wood. Now, all right, getting into it, though, in general. So as you can see, economic nationalism and showing off your industry does become a point of pride, which helps the continent industrialize a little bit faster because you want to be better than your next door neighbor. So going forward, last one, this is the most annoying one and boring one, corporate banks and limited liability protection. Write it down. We're going to talk about that in class because it's very, very hard to understand, and it's also super, 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 super boring. All right, so like, and I don't want to waste time on a flip talking about it. Now, anyway, we are now going to switch gears completely. So I think that you should probably like make a subsection in your notes or make a little like arrow or a line or something like that, because we're now going to actually transition into talking about what the front door of the continent is going to do after Napoleon has been exiled the second time, right? So Napoleon has now been exiled the second time. Waterloo has ended, and we are now beginning our understanding of total European history at the year 1815, right? Now, why are we starting at the year 1815? Why is this year so important? What's the big deal? Well, first and foremost, this is the beginning of time period 3. So the thing about it is y'all are officially more than halfway done with this course. I'm so proud of y'all. Y'all are crushing it right now. You're ahead of schedule. Let's keep getting after it, okay? But 1815 is going to serve as a massively important year and kind of a very, very big breaking point, because before 1815 is the era of Napoleon and the French Revolution. And then Europe is going to be wildly different after 1815. I always make this argument as a European historian that we look at dates kind of like before Christ and after, BC being before Christ, AD being Anno Domini, meaning of course in the year of our Lord. We look at literally history in like European countries for the most part, and then also in Western society as like the era that happened ancient before the birth of Christ, and then after the growth of Christianity. When you're looking at European history, you could almost make the argument of before Napoleon and after Napoleon, and that's why this year is so essential, okay? Because Napoleon and all of the things that he has done have created a massive set of issues, right? This right here is a great example that I try to use to talk about the growth of Europe during 1815 and after Napoleon. Napoleon is a lot like a tube of toothpaste, right? Like, so he basically, in a nutshell, what he has done is he has like pushed out all these issues, right? Have you ever heard the old analogy where it's like, if you push toothpaste out of it, or push toothpaste out of the tube, there's no getting it back in? Well, that's exactly what Napoleon is, right? He has created massive issues throughout all of Europe, right? There are now issues with the balance of power. There are now issues with picking up after him because these wars have left millions dead. And there also were issues with restructuring Europe because he's actually taken over so many countries and then put people like his brothers in charge of them to be kings of the Netherlands and of Spain and of the Holy Roman Empire and places like that, right? So now you got to figure out, where is that balance of power? How do we reorchestrate everything so France is not the most dominant country in all of Europe, and so that this new confederation of the Rhine and the Prussia has its own ideas? How do we make sure that Austria is no more powerful than France and that Russia is just as powerful as everybody else? And how do we get everything back to normal? Well, they decide to do it at a very important meeting known as the Congress of Vienna, okay? The Congress of Vienna is going to be wildly, wildly important, and it's a meeting that was held to restructure Europe, okay? And it's a series of meetings, actually, of these people known as the Quadruple Alliance. And we're going to pick up right there in class, and we're going to start talking about what the Quadruple Alliance is, who's in it, and how they're going to fix all this stuff going down. That's right. Y'all just got a 17-minute flip because I don't feel like recording anything anymore. But y'all have a great day. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.